Chapter 1064. Bai also followed Lu Shirlu to Luopa Mountain and did not move. Even if Wei Ba personally came to invite him, Bai was too lazy to say a word of courtesy. He looked indifferent and just shook his head. It was an obvious order to drive him away. Wei Shanjun, who was about to get the godly title Night Wandering, left immediately. He didn't dare to disturb the cultivation of the most proud person in the world. Even though Bai knew that Mr. First, the head of the 10 sages of the Confucian Temple, was on the other side of the cloud-splitting mountain, he still stayed in the mansion at the foot of the mountain. He lived in seclusion and only occasionally walked to the top of the mountain where the old mountain temple was located to enjoy the scenery. The sun rose in the East Sea and set in the West Mountain. For some reason, Bai always bumped into the strange girl in black. However, the girl, who is said to be the right guardian of Luopa Mountain, never got close to him to chat. She just stood far away with a cotton bag on her side. She greeted Zhou Mili out of courtesy. Of course, it was also because of her good friend Jun Qian. The little girl smiled and nodded vigorously. She held the green bamboo cane and the golden shoulder pole in her arms and held the string of the cotton satchel with her small hand. Bai couldn't just stare at the girl like this, so he forced a smile. Seeing that she still didn't speak, Bai continued to enjoy the burning clouds in the sky. Chapter 1065. The capital of the Nanyuan Kingdom was known as Daliang. Chun Pingon knew the capital like the back of his hand, so he picked a restaurant with a thriving business to eat roasted fish. There was a green celery river on the outskirts of the capital, and the fish there were extremely plump and delicious. Roasted fish paired with Daliang's lotus, white, was a masterpiece. Because of its low price and high quality, high officials, nobles, and peddlers all liked it. However, Chun Pingon knew immediately that it was this fish. It was the kind of fish that had been transported from other rivers to the Green Celery River for a few days of bathing.
He didn't say anything, though.
He glanced at the young shopkeeper. His appearance was the same as the shopkeeper of the past. Perhaps because the old shopkeeper was old, he had passed on the restaurant and his cooking skills to his son. The secret spicy oil, condiments, and side dishes of the roasted fish were all the same. The only thing missing was the taste, which was called kindness. Of course, it was also possible that the restaurant was run on a shoestring. Nowadays, the Green Celery River fish was already a river delicacy exclusive to the rich of Daliang. Then the extra condiments that this little restaurant had on the side of the road was called livelihood. Earlier, it was Chun Pingon who led the way to the small restaurant. There was an empty table against the wall and 2 benches. Lu Xianyang sat down first, occupying one of the benches. He sat in the middle of the bench, slapped the table, and asked if there was any wine. Gu Qin was standing by the table. Chun Pingon indicated for him to sit on the inside. After Gu Qin sat down, he reached out and moved the end of the bench closer to Chun Pingon. When Chun Pingon moved and was about to sit down, Gu Qin moved the bench back. In the past, when they sat on a ridge in the countryside, the child's head would be about the same level as the youth's shoulder. Now they sat side by side. Chapter 1066. The blue waves were vast, and the water was cloudy. What a paradise on earth! There were more than 1,000 islands in the lake. They were scattered all over the place, and the green plates were filled with snail shells. The ancestral mountain in the center of the lake was near the Dhamma Temple and the Lake Lord Temple. Not far away, there were 2 islands of different sizes. They were not far apart and looked at each other across the water. The larger Jade Hairpin Island had rows upon rows of temples and mansions. The Lake Lord Temple liked peace and did not want outsiders to climb the ancestral mountain. Chapter 1067. Within Yingchuan County, there were 3 riders riding side by side in the wind and snow. Following the map, they diverged from the relatively wide official road and turned into a small mountain road. At noon, because of the continuous heavy snow, their vision was blurred, making the already rugged mountain road even more difficult to travel. Fortunately, their mounts were not inferior horses, but fine horses from the Taoist Academy in the capital. It was said that they were descendants of the mountain dragon. Although their bloodline was thin, They could travel mountains and rivers as if they were walking on flat ground. For this trip, other than their respective official documents, the most important thing was the official document that was personally written by the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Personnel, signed by the immortal protector of the state, and then examined and approved by the largest Taoist temple in Ruzhou. The leading writer was a young woman. She wore a black veil crown and a thick and warm green Taoist robe. She had curved eyebrows and plump cheeks. Her figure was thin but well-rounded. She rode a light yellow horse. A pair of embroidered shoes were slightly exposed, lightly touching the golden stirrups. Chapter 1068. On the shore of the Autumn-Chi Lake, a short man in cotton clothes and straw shoes did not like to carry a saber at his waist. He was used to carrying a scabbard. The man slightly raised his gaze and met a man in a green robe with a jade hairpin on his head. Looking at the other person's breathing speed, the weight of his footsteps as well as his aura, he seemed to be a moderate martial artist. This was normal. Those who could enter the Autumn-Chi Lake were not ordinary people. The man smiled and covered his sleeves with his hands. He asked, "You're called Wu Jiang?" Although the younger generation of Jianghu talents were not invited by Lord Gao, it was not strange that Wu Jiang appeared here. Wu Jiang nodded. Chapter 1069. Divine Cloud City's peach blossoms were as famous as the Xuandu Temple. Dong Huafu practiced his sword here, oblivious to the weather outside the city. The other 8 sword cultivators from the same hometown began to practice the dozen or so sword techniques that Divine Cloud City had made an exception to teach them. Ordinary Dao officials of Jade Pivot City, even if they were sword cultivators, could only rely on their cultivation and merit to obtain these superior sword techniques. Only Dong Huafu memorized the sword techniques silently, but did not practice these sword techniques that could not be bought with money. Apart from that, Dong Huafu was the only one among the 9 who had not received the Baek Ok Kyung Building's Jade Pivot City's official certificate. Regarding this, there were some discussions within Jade Pivot City, but they were all suppressed by Wang Hua. As one of the 2 deputy city lords of Divine Cloud City, Wang Hua was a middle-aged Taoist with a golden hibiscus crown. He was gentle and easy to talk to. He often came to the cottage to chat with Dong Huafu. Chapter 1070. Today, there were guests at Crow Mountain. A man and a woman. The woman was the latest grandmaster to enter the top 10 martial artists list, Gu Yenge from Yuzhou's Pipa Peak. Lin Jiangxian's 4 direct disciples were at the peak of the 2 peaks. The first disciple, Zhao Hechong. The person in charge of Crow Mountain now was this famous martial artist from the Peak State. The second disciple, Qi Huajian, was called Madame Qi by the mountain. She was a woman with a plump body and was very charming. She was also from the Peak State. Chapter 1071. Mini 4 Prefectures, Thunder Lake. On Plum Peak Island, the plum blossoms were as thin as a poem. Female Taoist Yangqing walked among them, holding a branch of plum blossoms. The ground was filled with white clouds formed by water fate. The most mysterious thing was that these white clouds of various sizes naturally formed the shape of petals. Beside her was one of the 2 lake lords, Lei Yu. She was born in the demon race, but was able to stand firm in the mini 4 prefectures. Step by step, she became one of the 2 lake lords of the mini 4 prefectures and the female master of the vast Thunder Lake. Previously, they went to the outer space together to congratulate the talisman Yu Xian, who successfully integrated with the Milky Way. Chapter 1072. Among cultivators, some like to hide, and some like to join in the fun. Lu Daochun of White Emperor City belonged to the latter. Besides, Lu Daochun himself was a lively person. After all, there were not many Qi refinement warriors who were as famous as Gu Qingsong in the world. He had once been personally suppressed by the Grand Heaven Master of Mount Longhu. After 1,000 years of peace and quiet, Lu Daochun had changed his name to Lu Qicheng after coming out of seclusion. It seemed that he had improved a lot. Chapter 1073. Lu Sun walked out of the lotus root blessed land and arrived at a courtyard. The umbrella opened like a flower, hovering in the air and spinning slowly. Lu Sun appeared in the shade. At the door, a little girl in black stood straight. She turned her head slowly to the left, then to the right. She kept looking around, calling it a patrol. Beside her was a white-haired boy who was in charge of recording the exact time when people entered and exited the blessed land. This Luapa Mountain's registrar was guarding the door with the little girl. When Lu Sun arrived at Luapa Mountain, he learned that this place was called Spirit Gathering Peak. However, Jisei Peak, where the Luapa Mountain's ancestral master hall was located, was a secondary peak, not the ancestral peak. Because the hill master, head steward Julien, and the ancestral master of discipline were not on the mountain at the moment, the key to opening the door of the blessed land was handed over to Nguyen Shu for safekeeping. A house was specially built in the mountain to store the parasol tree umbrella. In fact, other than a layer of camouflage, the house did not have any restrictions on the landscape. Chapter 1074. Surrounded by heroes alone, he still took the initiative to invite everyone to come together. Dao and Sword were all casual. As soon as Chun Pingon said this, the entire Damu temple felt a strong murderous aura. The white-robed young immortal of the past was now a middle-aged green-robed swordsman with a smile on his face. His tone was gentle, and there was not a bit of harshness on his face. His expression was calm, like a teacher teaching a large group of mischievous children. Later, recite more seriously, or else you will have to stand up and be beaten. Zhou Shuzhen's expression changed slightly. She only hoped to use the momentum of Jiang Quan's revenge to give Qin Pingon a show of strength and to make a good start for today's meeting. Of course, they would pay a great price. Jiang Quan, who came to seek revenge, would undoubtedly die. Chapter 1075. In the mountain deity temple near the Cloud Villa, a rustic old man with a crooked back was busy in the kitchen. He was wearing an apron, and the sound of chopping on the chopping board was like the sound of clothes being pounded. The mountain deity, who never received guests, brought such an old guy back to the mountain for the first time. She even leaned against the door and looked at the old man in the room with affection. This made the female ghost maids of all ages in the temple stand far away and look at each other. Could it be that the mountain deity found her father? Julien did not turn his head. He skillfully put stacks of seasonings into small delicate bowls made by the factory of his homeland. He smiled and said, "Monsieur, actually I don't have the sorrow of leaving my hometown, the pain of the fall of my country, the sorrow of the thorns, or the feeling of being separated. I have no regrets when I was alive, so why should I care about what happens after I die? Therefore, if you are worried about me, I will think that you are forcing yourself to be worried for a new poem. It is not worthwhile. Really, don't frown. It is not good for others to see." Xie Tao just stared at him in a daze. She did not say anything. Chapter 1076. A generation of mountains and rivers was born with a generation of characters. The mountains and rivers were picturesque, and the characters were even more outstanding. Not to mention Xiego, even the Minister of Justice Changming could not understand why Qin Pingon was so nervous. Only his disciple and Guizhujiu could see it. During the meeting at the inverted Xian Mountain's Spring Banner House, Qin Pingon showed up for the first time as the new hidden official of the Great Wall of Sword Qi. He was not nervous at all. No matter how small the blessed land was, it was still a complete world with an orderly cycle of Tao. The sun and moon rose and fell, the grass and trees withered, the flowers bloomed and withered, the immortals and mortals changed, and the dim and bright flowed. Moreover, Qin Pingon regarded the blessed land of lotus roots as his hometown, Lizhu Cave. Chapter 1077. Qin Pingon brought Xiaomi to the house. The doors to the courtyard and the house were all open. In the guest hall, other than Yu Xian, Senior Marshal Brother Jun Qian and Bai were also present. Pei Qian was sitting upright, and there was also a little boy in green who looked down, not knowing what he was doing sitting there. Old immortal you don't seem to be a wine lover. Moreover, the old man's cultivation level is so high, and he's so old. If he really toasted him at the table, Chen Lingjun was afraid that his hands would tremble and he wouldn't be able to hold the wine bowl steadily. Chen Pingon, who was wearing a green Taoist robe and carrying a sword on his back, stepped over the threshold and bowed to the old Taoist master. Junior greets Taoist master you. The old Taoist master stretched out his hand and gestured twice, smiling. As a guest, I'm not being courteous. I'm just strolling around in my own house. As the host, fellow Taoist Chen, there's no need to be courteous. It was Chen Pingon's first time meeting this world's most proud person.
He bowed again.
Greetings, Mr. Bai, senior martial brother Jun Qian. Bai also nodded in greeting. Chapter 1078. Chen Pingon left Yu Xian behind and left the mountain peak alone. He went to the bamboo house to change into his daily mountain attire and put on his cotton robe and cloth shoes again. It was green and green. Xiego sat at the table by the cliff and said that he did not disappoint the mission and passed the message to that flashy Lu. Chen Pingon nodded with a smile and asked him to tell Guizhuzhou to have dinner together. In the past, as long as Guizhuzhou stayed in the mountain to eat, Chen Pingon would personally cook a few dishes that were his specialty. Not to mention Zhu Lian's culinary skills, they were very appetizing and did not go against his heart. Yu Xian was quite helpless. Taoist Chen's self-evaluation of not enough aptitude, use ideas to make up for it, made the old Taoist master speechless again. Why did Taoist friends scold him again? Old scholar, you have to discipline him. Peach Talisman Mountain was unique among the 5 sections. Yu Xian remembered that he had a few immortal seedlings with good aptitude. They could climb the mountain easily. It was just that they were all too arrogant. He remembered that there was a young Jindan sword cultivator who was conferred the title of Taoist Sword Immortal at the Jingwei Temple. He was so arrogant when he saw him, the founder, and even complained that the founder was not a sword immortal. It was a fly in the ointment. Should he let them come to Luopa Mountain to gain experience? Don't you all think that you are very smart and that breaking through realms is as common as eating and drinking? I'll let you all see Chen Pingon, who broke his Jindan again, and only returned to his nascent soul after 3 rounds of seclusion. I don't know if Taoist friend Shen has the leisure to teach them. Is he willing to teach them? It's unlikely. Chapter 1079. During this trip to Jisei Peak, the old scholar came and left in a hurry, but he did not tell Chen Pingon the reason. Chen Pingon believed that his last disciple had already guessed it. This was also because the pan-water discussion of the way by the supreme sage teacher had talked about the knowledge related to the matter of asking the heavens. The old Xiozai was better at this. No matter whether it was the Tao seeking with the old teacher in the imitation White Jade capital or the Tao preaching to Xian in outer space, it all showed the old Xiozai's knowledge. This was why he was able to ask for leave from the Sage of Rites and take an hour to go to Luopa Mountain. In the end, the old elementary scholar, who wanted to stay for a few more days, could only apologize to the children with a bitter face. He then pulled Chen Pingon along for a short walk on the mountain road. The old man quickly asked a few important questions. Are you confident that you can return to pudding after your seclusion? There was one good thing about Chen Pingon, and it was that he would not deliberately tell white lies that would reassure others. I have a certain amount of confidence. You don't have to worry about this. Taking a step back, I have my own methods. Chapter 1080. Aquarius Continent, south of Great Blasphemy in the Qingxing Kingdom. A young man in straw sandals with a sword on his back was chewing on a piping hot pancake. He stood at the edge of the crowded stage and did not look at the young lady with heavy makeup, but only at Qianmo. The night was dark. In the capital of Jade Xian Kingdom, there was a mansion that was often haunted but not haunted. A Taoist priest finally had some free time after a busy day. He lit the lamp and read some miscellaneous books. There were 2 dishes on the table. This Taoist priest, Wu Di, who had a reputation for setting up a fortune-telling stall, was flipping through a book called Heavenly Works Opening Things. He read as he read. However, he picked the content that he liked and read the 2 chapters, Pottery Spirit and Hammer Forging, twice. During this time, the Taoist priest started reading from the preface, full of energy, among all things. This book has nothing to do with the imperial examinations. Good, very well said. This is the real weight of a teacher's self-teaching. A woman's voice sounded faintly outside the window. It was truly frightening. Then why are you reading so enthusiastically? The Taoist priest boasted shamelessly and replied, "This poor Taoist is a private Taoist priest. Why should I learn from those scholars who came to the capital to take the imperial examinations?" Later on, the female ghost in a bright red dress who was standing by the window was the female official in the palace who was in charge of opening chests for the empress in the past. She was really tired of listening to the Taoist priest, so she stood on her tiptoes and stretched out her hand to knock on the window paper, asking the Taoist priest to change to the Ziyao that was so enjoyable just by listening to it. The money-grubbing Taoist priest stretched out his hand to press down on the book and said that she had to pay. The female ghost was unwilling to waste her money, and her feet left the ground and floated away. The evening drum in the temple was long and drawn out. The middle-aged scholar who was copying the sutras stopped writing and shook his wrist. He turned his head to look outside the door. The old cobwebs under the eaves were broken and fluttering. For some reason, he remembered the content written in a scholar's notebook. The Buddhist sutra said, "Stir with spirit. All have Buddha nature." In the Secretary province of a small country, a person who had been a gentleman on the beam for a long time to borrow books sat on a high-hanging beam. He lowered his head to look at an official who had just finished his duty. He put on a thick cotton coat over his official robe and came here to pick a few books that he liked. He looked left and right, but there was no one around. In fact, there was only Su Li who helped to keep watch at the door. If there was any movement, Su Li, who had received the money, would alert the official in the room by coughing. After the official put the 3 books into his pocket, he seemed to feel that it was inappropriate. The cotton robe did not look good enough and might give him away. He could only reluctantly put one of the ancient books back to its original position and tiptoed out of the library that had been in disrepair for a long time. When Su Li locked the door, the civil official looked back and thought that one day when he became a high-ranking official, he would definitely ask the Ministry of Revenue to allocate funds to rebuild this place. He ordered the guards to be loyal to their duties and not let these precious books be taken home year after year by the thieves. Chapter 1081. Deer cries, eating the apple of the wild. My heart is in the green collar. If one thinks about the innocence, how similar is love between men and women to seeking Tao in the mountains. Sir, this rain is a little different. Ning Ji caught up with Chen Pingan. He didn't bring an umbrella when he went out. His senior apprentice brother Zhao Xuxia was usually the first to go to the Source Village School and prepare breakfast there. He didn't expect it to rain halfway. Fortunately, he didn't run for long before he met the sir who seemed to have predicted the heavy rain before he went out. He was really a learned man. Chapter 1082. There were hundreds of flowers in the mountains, and white clothes made wine. Chun Pingan, who appeared later, picked up the bowl of wine on the table and took the initiative. He stood up and drank a mouthful, then smiled and looked at the female cultivator from the wilderness whose mind and soul were imprisoned here. Unexpectedly, she was also someone who ate the rice of 100 families and stole the fist of 100 families. He had really picked up a treasure. Addressing her as fellow Taoist was very appropriate. He asked, "Fellow Taoist, please tell us your name and tell us your wonderful story." Yes. The female cultivator couldn't hide anything, and she couldn't hide anything. The 2 men, one standing and one sitting, saw everything clearly. It was because there was a picture of her life experience on the top of the mountain. The past that she remembered deeply were the colorful pictures that looked like real people. The memory was blurred and the memory and reality were mixed, so the picture presented was messy. It turned out that she was called Su Jiaoqia. Her real name was Xiao Xing, and her Taoist name was Yurun. She was nicknamed Xiao Xiao by her master. Her real body was a kind of ancient bird that had never been recorded. It liked to fly across the world with fire in its mouth. Therefore, she majored in fire spells in the early days. She was wearing an emerald feather robe made of immortal molting after she was molted into a human shape. The preacher named the robe Big Appearance. The white-clothed inner devil gloated, "What a bird of prey." This unexpected disaster, which had been planned for many years, almost fell into Miss Zhao's hands.
Yes.
Chun Pingon, who had a jade hairpin on his head and a pair of golden eyes, smiled and said, "A nascent soul stage warrior who can be loyal to the Luopa mountain after his memories are reconstructed will be given a robe of the level of a half-deity weapon. Together with the methods of the brow drawer and the tailor, he will also be able to learn the secret knowledge of the priestess in the desolate land. This is truly a profitable deal." "Yes." The demon in white snorted. "This kind of shady method can only be used to deal with chi trainers who are one level lower than her. It's not a good method." "Yes." Chapter 1083. The heavy rain lasted for 3 consecutive days. After a day of rest, the mountains and rivers of the human world seemed to be drinking wine. Gukan rested temporarily at the top of the mountain that used to be called Baiyu, but was now called Qian Mountain. She sent a flying sword message to Lu Qicheng, who liked to show off. She had something to discuss with him. As soon as the flattered Lu Qicheng received the letter, he hurriedly set off from the Immortal in Zhuzhou City, without any delay. Before leaving, Pavilion Master Lu specially put on the pink Taoist robe again. As a martial uncle, he had to support his martial nephew, so that he would not look shabby in front of outsiders and lose face for Gukan. He didn't expect that in the place called Qian Mountain, there was only Gukan and the maidservant from the savage land. At the edge of the cliff on the mountainside, Lu Qicheng was a little confused. He descended from the clouds and didn't dare to complain. He just couldn't help but ask, "Gukan, are you bored here? Are you looking for your martial uncle for a drink?" Gukan said, "Someone asked to see you." Lu Qicheng sneered, "How arrogant. Asked to see me?" Chapter 1084. Dali, Yuzhou, Vinism Temple. At dawn, the middle-aged scholar finished his vegetarian meal and cooked himself a big bowl of 8 treasure porridge. After eating the porridge, he sat down at the table and started reading. Another day passed, and the moment he opened the book, the light shone through the window. The novice monk knocked on the window again to remind him, "Mr. Chen, the clouds have risen in the mountains. Do you want to take a look?" The scholar put down the book in his hand and smiled. "All right, wait a moment. I'll change my boots." Due to the heavy rain for 3 consecutive days, the mountains were especially cold in spring. The middle-aged scholar wore a coarse cotton coat for warmth and a pair of suede boots. He held a mountaineering staff in his hand. Chapter 1085. The whole world seemed to be waiting for an eagle to grow up. Finally, Ning Yao became a pure sword cultivator of the 14th state. She had the highest hopes and expectations, but she didn't disappoint at all. Ning Yao became a pure sword cultivator. Reaching the 14th state was like Chao Ci reaching the 11th state on the path of martial arts. Chapter 1086. Chun Pingon stood where he was. An orphan from Clay Bottle Alley, who grew up eating the food of hundreds of families, finally stood here. He knew his own bitterness and hardships. The courtyard occupied a large area, which was worthy of being the former prime minister's residence. The shade of the trees was dense, the sun was high, and the ground was covered with fine golden light, like golden silk embroidery, on the seamless green brick floor. Although the bricks were laid, the floor did not bulge. Obviously, the craftsmanship of the craftsman was not bad. This was the study place of the head of the family, Ma Yan. It was a French style with 7 rooms and 8 deep rafters, which probably showed that he knew etiquette. The study room was so big that it made people click their tongues. It was piled with precious books that had not been flipped through since it was bought. There were several priceless ancient zither, several jade mountains that were half the height of a person, and golden cruise ships. The high officials and dignitaries of the capital who had come here to drink tea and wine all said that it was elegant and melancholy. If they showed a little bit of dazzle, they could always make the master feel that they were genuine scholars. In fact, Ma Yan had always wanted to put green glazed tiles on the roof, like those Taoist temples, which looked beautiful. However, he was persuaded by his wife, who said that this kind of business was overstepping. His Majesty was not deaf and blind, so it was not worthwhile to put up this kind of extravagant display that would easily make people jealous. When the family ancestral hall was full of Jinshi plaques, then it was a real scholarly family. One day, when his eldest son came home and saw it, he would be happy. Ma Yan felt that it was reasonable, so a few years ago, he let his second son, Ma Yanshan, participate in the imperial examination. As expected, he was third in the imperial examination, which made him very proud. If Ma Che won first place again this year and became the Zhuangyuan, then the family would have the so-called generation of Zhuangyuan atmosphere, right? A woman who lived in luxury, even if she was almost 70 years old, still looked like a woman in her 40s. She was indeed a woman who walked among a group of titled madams all year round. She was obviously calmer than the man beside her. She could still squeeze out a smile and pretend to be close to him. On Qin Zheng's fair wrist, she wore an emerald bracelet. She reached out and rubbed the corner of her eyes, which were full of crow's feet, as if she wanted to squeeze out some bitter tears. Chun Pingon? Is he the son of Master Chun from Mud Bottle Alley? Chun Quan was one of the best porcelain masters in our hometown. He was still young, but he already had such excellent skills. Back then, in our Golden Goose Kiln, if he didn't keep his skills to himself and bring out a group of good disciples, I really don't know what to do. He was the pillar of our Dragon Kiln. I remember that at that time, the kiln workers said that only Master Yao of Baoshi Kiln dared to say that he was better than Qin Quan in making porcelain. Lord Lin of the kiln supervisor's office had such high standards that he was willing to often eat and drink with Qin Quan. They got along very well, and many old kiln masters were envious. Qin Quan was such a good person. How could he be gone? God is blind, and good people don't have good karma. It's just that you have suffered. Yes, if I remember correctly, back then, it was my mother-in-law who went to Mud Bottle Alley to help deliver a baby. Fortunately, both mother and son are safe. Now, you are so promising, even better than our Ku Xian. I believe that Qin Quan and Qin Zheng's intention was very obvious. She wanted to drag it out as long as she could. This bastard from Mud Bottle Alley, who suddenly became rich by luck, had rushed here too quickly. In front of the house, there was a group of useless people who were not worthy of being served dog meat. She actually let him walk to the back of the house just like that. Fortunately, Ma Yan had already sent out a few secret letters just now. Some were for the imperial tutor of the imperial court of Jade Xian country, and some were for the city god temple of the capital. Before this, the more people Chun Pingon killed, the more this guy who had not directly died in the hands of the Wasteland Demon Clan, the more he felt that he was in the wrong today. Chapter 1087. A hearty revenge was a drinking session where one would not return until one was drunk. Drinking by oneself, drinking slowly, it was enough to be happy alone. There was a person wearing a golden crown and a green gauze robe with purple clouds lingering around it. He held a glowing white jade Ganoderma in his hand and a pair of white cloud shoes on his feet. He was about 30 years old, his appearance was flawless, and his body was clean. His face was not very handsome. He was like a young immortal in the fairy tales. His home was in the mountains and rivers, and the flowers and bamboo were dense. He was also like a Taoist who lived in seclusion in the mountains. He cultivated and occasionally came to the human world. Chapter 1088. During the Qingming festival, when it was raining heavily, the women of the officials, wealthy clans, and the families of the middle class would mostly ride their carriages outside the city to pay respects to their ancestors. Although they were sweeping the tombs of their old friends, there was no mournful expression on their faces. Their clothes were beautiful, and each of them carried fine wine and delicacies. Along the way, they chatted noisily and drank to their heart's content. It was more like an excursion. It was no wonder that there were often scholars from other countries who used this as an excuse to ridicule the people of Yushuan Nation's capital. Pei Qian wanted to go to the Xing Wang Temple in the capital, so there was some distance between the palace and Qinianjian. She bid farewell to Gu Kan and Gu Ling and secretly sneaked into the capital of Yushuan country. The security of a small country, whether it was on the mountain or at the foot of the mountain, was not considered strict in the face of a few martial artists. It was not an exaggeration to say that there were holes in all directions. However, Gu Kan brought Gu Ling to the city gate and handed over the pass. She chose to walk into the capital obediently. Gu Ling covered her mouth and laughed. Lu Xianyang is not worried about me going to Qinianjian. Are you not worried about me? Chapter 1089. I wish everyone a happy and peaceful new year. Mwah. The shadows of the trees danced, reflecting a jade-green color. Just now, Yu Shiwu and Ma Yenshan both had a dream. Yu Shiwu dreamt that he had turned into a butterfly and was stuck in a spider's web. He regretted breaking out of his cocoon. Ma Yenshan dreamt that he was drunk with a beautiful woman on a small boat at night. There was a lone crane crossing the river. When he woke up, he saw two Taoists with feathered robes fluttering in the wind. Ma Yenshan felt as though he had met a true immortal. Chapter 1090. Gu Kan had a good chat with the old Jindan, who was the state preceptor. He didn't put on airs and was tactful, so they hit it off. They sat together on the threshold of the main hall and didn't have any hostile atmosphere. The palace maids brought in the food prepared by the imperial kitchen. They only dared to take a look at the young man in a scholarly robe from afar. Then, they walked quietly like cats in the night and came to the door of the main hall with their heads lowered. Huang Lai took the two food boxes. Gu Kan smiled and thanked them. The old man said that they didn't need to care about the food boxes and that he would deal with them. They then left quietly. The old man only ate a piece of cake and stopped. The reason was that he couldn't eat anything too sweet as it would stick to his teeth. Gu Kan munched on the delicacies from the palace in big mouthfuls. The old man grabbed a flea from his body and twisted it gently with 2 fingers. With a snap, it was as if every flea he pulled out from his body was a silent complaint. Huang Lai, who had been the imperial tutor of the Jade Xian nation for decades, said to himself that he felt that it was very interesting to touch a flea in front of the officials. Gu Kan nodded in agreement. It was very elegant. The old man then asked Gu Kan if she was Lord Lu of the Dragon Spring Sword sect. Gu Kan smiled and shook her head, saying that she wasn't. The reason was that Lord Lu wasn't as easy to talk to as she was. Lu Xianyang had always done things without caring about the consequences. If it were him, the palace would have been in a mess. For example, Lu Xianyang would have directly blocked her and Xue Xiao's door. Huang Lai was even more uncertain about the identity of the young man in front of him. How could his tone be so casual when talking about Lord Lu? He couldn't be the one from the Cloud Mountain, could he? It was impossible. Could he be the great sword immortal me from the Sword Aura sect? I heard that this jade-pudding sword cultivator of the hidden official lineage of the Summer Palace came to the vast world and is now in the immortal realm. Does it mean that the water and soil of the vast world is actually not much worse than the Great Wall of Sword Aura? Gu Kan seemed to have guessed the old man's thoughts, but she didn't rush to introduce herself. In the Aquarius continent, the Jade Xian nation was a small nation that was neither too high nor too low. Because it was one of the vassal states of the Dali dynasty, Huang Lai's title of imperial tutor was just an empty decoration. Although he was said to be the imperial tutor who was second only to one and above thousands, he was nothing more than a golden core who was hired by the Xue clan to keep up appearances. In the end, he was in a completely different situation compared to embroidered Chui Dong in the Dali dynasty's Song clan. It wasn't just because of the disparity between their realms, it was also because the imperial tutor Chui Dong was looking for trouble while Huang Lai was avoiding trouble. Of course, Huang Lai still admired that embroidered tiger from the bottom of his heart. The reason was simple. In the old man's opinion, without the Dali cavalry and the imperial tutor Chui Dong, the Aquarius continent, which was filled with hundreds of countries, was not just a country, but a person was worse than a ghost. After all, even a watchdog in a peaceful world lived more like a human than a person in a chaotic world. Huang Lei probably felt that it wasn't a good idea to just sit idly in front of each other, so he found a lame topic and asked tentatively, "Fellow Taoist, how did you get to know Mountain Lord Chen?" Gukin didn't answer his question. "When I was young and ignorant, I heard a certain person talk about a principle that seemed very empty at the time. He said that being a bookkeeper who only deals with numbers all day might not be very interesting, but at least you can find joy in the midst of hardship. It was as small as calculating the daily expenses of a small household. Ordinary expenses were as big as researching a mountain sect or even a country's tax records. You can discover a lot of hidden knowledge that is easily overlooked by others. As long as someone studies deeply and thoroughly enough, they can gradually see through the clouds and gradually see the spirit of a country, the trajectory of its rise and fall, and the traces of its policies. It's like having a real account book on the table without all the embellishments and falsehoods. Every vein in the account book is a clear will track. When we are willing to pay the price and listen attentively, we can clearly hear the thunder of how history came to be and where it leads to." Huang Lai pondered for a moment. It was indeed a novel idea that he had never heard of before. The old man turned his head to look at the layers of palaces and sighed. Of course, the idea is very good. It's just that it's easy to say, but it's hard to do. Without great perseverance and skill, it's impossible to accomplish such a feat. The threshold for this matter is too high. Within a country, how many people can come into contact with these confidential files and casually flip through the account books of a country's Ministry of Revenue? Chapter 1091. At the border of 100,000 mountains, an old man and a young man were hovering on their swords, not daring to take half a step past the lightning pool. It was Old Deaf, who had returned home sneakily. He used telepathy to ask if he could settle down at Senior's training ground and boldly discuss something. In the end, Old Blind wasn't willing to pay attention to him. This was very sullen. He had taken the initiative to pay a visit, but was silently rejected. Old Deaf didn't dare to recklessly barge into this land, so he could only stand there and stare. It was only after Ning Yao pleaded for him that Old Deaf could bring his disciple into this lifeless and desolate land, landing on the lone peak that seemed to be worshipped by thousands of mountains. Chapter 1092. After a moment of silence, Yushiru asked curiously, "Can you control the speed of time in this world?" Chun Pingon remained silent. In a split second, Yushiru saw strange scenes. The heavy snow suddenly stopped, and in the blink of an eye, it was spring and flowers bloomed. The grass was long, and the orioles were flying. Groups of children were flying kites on the shore. The plum rain continued, and the summer flood surged. It was a bright moonlit night on the river. The ripples were still, and the lines were like painted lines. There was a ferryman who looked like an immortal or a demon. His body was as thin as a bamboo, and his Taoist robes were as white as the wild clouds. He stepped on a small boat and flew across the river without a boatman. The autumn wind was rustling. A villager carried 2 bamboo cages with a man and a woman in them to the riverside. In the end, they welcomed another heavy snowfall. To a bystander like Yushiru, the changing scenery of the 4 seasons and the local customs were like pages of a book being quickly flipped by a bystander. During this process, Yushiru's body could completely sense the changes in temperature of the seasons. However, just as Yushiru was sure that Chen Pingon could control the river of time, Chen Pingon suddenly raised his hand and snapped his fingers in front of Yushiru's eyes. Have you heard of the saying, "One leaf can't see"? While speaking, Yushiru was shocked to find that he and Chen Pingon were in a pitch-black darkness. Chen Pingon smiled and said, "One leaf can't see. Since this leaf can make people unable to see anything, it can also make people see something. It's just a small carving on a leaf. Compared to working hard to create a flawless world, wouldn't it save more time effort, money, and worry if I tamper with your vision? While Yushuru was still in doubt, Chen Pingon had already pulled Yushuru back to the original place. He reached out his hand to catch a snowflake and muttered to himself, "Previously, when I attended a meeting at the Confucian Temple, I was lucky enough to have a walk with Mr. Zheng at a ferry. Mr. Zheng said something strange during the walk, and I still can't believe it. He said, I once saw two snowflakes that were exactly the same." Yushuru bent down to pick up some thin stones from the shore and threw them into the water. The stones caused a series of ripples that were not connected, and the water splashed from big to small. Chapter 1093. It rained continuously in the mountains, and the vegetation knew spring the best. At the tavern at the foot of the mountain that had been renamed Folding Mountain, mountain goddess Songpu, who had changed her name along with her own mountain, used the aura observation technique. She looked at the capital of the Jade Xian nation in the distance. She could no longer care about the fate of the Ma family. She was only worried that her folding mountain was adjacent to the capital and was afraid that it would be affected. She did not know how big of a storm the group of people from before would cause in the capital. She was afraid that this kind of a mortal fight that could easily cause mountains to collapse and the earth to crack would not stop once the two sides started. The three drinkers who had previously taken shelter from the rain and rested their feet. The current sect master of the Dragon Spring Sword Sect, Lu Xianyang. Chapter 1094. After the rain in the mountains, the air was still cool, and there was nothing to do for a long time. Beside the table at the foot of the mountain, one big and one small, both had their legs crossed. They were eating melon seeds and chatting, leisurely passing the time. The two of them were a pair of brothers with high aspirations in Luopa Mountain. Tao does not need to be cultivated. Fist does not need to be trained. Why? Both of us are top-notch geniuses. Ignoring the geniuses, people who can climb mountains to cultivate have the same talent. On the road of cultivation, one must avoid some potholes, for example, the talisman Tao. Chapter 1095. Chun Pingon had changed into a Taoist robe. The world was white, and his Taoist robe was bright red. The tall trees in the snow were abnormally red. At the top of the city wall, for some reason, Zhoumi's body had shrunk to the size of an ordinary person. Chapter 1096. Regardless of whether Chen Pingon really knew or was pretending to know, Ma Kuxuan had indeed been tricked. Taking advantage of the slight pause in Ma Kuxuan's thoughts, Chen Pingon felt as if he had been pardoned. The caged bird escaped and quickly took a step back. Ripples appeared behind him, and a door appeared out of thin air. Chen Pingon's figure disappeared into a secret realm of mountains and rivers that Zhoumi had described as a cocoon. Thus, he left the illusory world of the Great Wall of Sword Qi. Ma Kuxian couldn't see clearly, but he didn't look worried at all. Zhoumi, on the other hand, saw through the trick and explained, he used the mountain-moving technique to make the mountain move to my divine ability. That step he took was just a deliberate trick. In short, he can change his secret location at any time in his own territory. Compared to shrinking the earth veins into an inch, it is more direct. It is more concealed. In a battle of the same realm, he is invincible. Ma Kuxuan said, "Time is limited. Let's not talk nonsense." Chapter 1097. For some reason, Gukan changed her mind at the last minute. She brought the servant girl Ling Qian, the imperial tutor, and Huang Lai back the way they came and returned to the small Taoist temple. Gukan walked to the door. She reached out to pick up the copper door knocker and knocked 3 times. There was no response for a long time. Gu Lingqian could not be bothered to wait any longer. She walked straight to her master's side and knocked on the door with her fists. Chongyang Temple, which was known for its alchemy in ancient times, seemed to have finally heard the commotion outside. Chapter 1098. The Great Wall of Sword Energy was once a place where it was easier to buy wine than to fetch water. The bustling bazaar was like a new book that continued the story of a dog-tailed marten. But no matter what, it was better than nothing. It was better than a dead silence. Simply becoming a foreigner who came to this place to pay homage to the past. Unlike Old Death, who was full of misgivings and twists and turns. Ciego noticed Chinpingan's abnormality, so she asked directly, "Mountain Master, why are you injured so badly? The other party's abilities are extraordinary." Chapter 1099. The world was clear and bright, washing away the old dust. Chun Pingan held an oil paper umbrella under his armpit and slowly walked towards the rented house. Although he was injured, he was still injured. Although he was injured, he was relieved. Bypassing the familiar Yamen temple, Chun Pingan used to climb over the wall to watch the scheming of the officials and study their verbal skills when he was still a Taoist priest in the fortune-telling booth. Using the Qi observation technique, he found traces of Gu Kan. Chun Pingan said something to him telepathically. Chapter 1100. Sword immortals who had attained the Tao seemed to be able to kill heaven and earth with just a word. Xiao Pu kept quiet out of fear. She was instantly certain. The battle in the Ma residence was definitely not a fight between Yu Pu and Yu Pu as they had estimated, with additional martial arts and divine abilities. It was a fight between immortals. As for the price of Chun Pingan and Sect Master Liu of Baek Okekyung Building, Xiao Pu and Lu Shixiang had their own estimates. Even if Chun Pingan was a martial artist of the ultimate realm, she still felt that he would definitely fall to the cave-dwelling realm. Lu Shixiang said that Chun Pingan's martial artist physique was unusual. Chapter 1101. After returning to the residence, before Chun Pingan even entered the door, he heard Lu Xianyang's deafening voice saying that he was on Martial Mountain. How godly his sword skills were, how peerless his hero was. Gukan could not be bothered to expose Lu Xianyang's bragging. It was true that this fellow went to the ancestral hall of Martial Mountain to block the entrance, but there was no conflict. The male and female ancestral masters of Martial Mountain who rushed to the entrance were very respectful to the sect master of the Dragon Spring Sword sect. They even led Lu Xianyang to visit a few of the sealed halls that were usually not open to the public. When Gu Kan arrived, Sword Immortal Lu was leisurely drinking tea. Chapter 1102. A lightning-fast drifting cloud boat, the mountains and rivers were spread out like a magnificent painting. As soon as the ferry left Northern Peak, Lu Xianyang shouted for Chun Pingan. Chun Pingan, who was sleeping on the table, stood up. He called out to Wei Pai several times in his mind, but no one responded. He could only walk out of the house and go to the bow of the boat. Wei Bian quickly appeared on the ship. In fact, when he heard the divine name, Chapter 1103. It was rare for Chun Pingan to be so relaxed. He slept until he woke up naturally and had a good night's sleep. There was only one night between night and day. He didn't know how many flowers bloomed and withered in the human world. When he woke up, he noticed that someone's face was against the door and Gu Kan was leaning against the wall. Chun Pingan couldn't help but laugh. He thought, "You two are protecting the formation. I'm not in seclusion." Chun Pingan suddenly opened the door. Lu Xianyang fell into the room. Gu Kan had a strange expression. Chun Pingan smiled. "How can there be so many assassinations? Do you think that I'm in the first layer of the pure realm?" Chapter 1104. Standing at the peak of the mountain was Chun Pingan's consciousness and the sword-bearer. Previously, they had traveled far away together and rushed to a secret place to refine swords. The first ancestor of the military school sneered and said, "You're finally acting like a human." It was the greatest reward. It was also the greatest irony. Chapter 1105. It was easy to get drunk, but there was no match in the world. Amidst the clouds, the entire White Emperor city, except for Zhengzhuzhong, was empty. Even the glazed glass pavilion had been thrown out of the city by Zhengzhuzhong. After all, as a junior brother, he had to listen to his senior brother. Lu Qicheng was helpless about this and did not dare to say no. However, he had to say goodbye to his senior brother before leaving. Zheng Juzhong looked at the tearful Lu Qicheng and sighed. Recalling an old incident from back then, Zheng Juzhong's heart softened, which was rare for him. He appeared at the mountain gate and warned his pink-robed junior apprentice brother. For example, if he went outside and caused trouble, he should not easily mention his master's name, in case the other party did not dare to kill him. Chapter 1106. In the shade of the green bamboo forest, there was a spacious house with 3 rooms facing a rippling pond. It was a harmonious spring. The grass was soft, the sun set and the moon rose, and the wind blew across the glass water. Chun Pingan stayed at the Friao foothill between the Jisei Peak and the fish-jumping mountain. He withdrew the 9 talisman clones, and his mind had returned to its original position. Chun Pingan began to recuperate in seclusion, nourish his body step by step, and refine his sword again. Mending the robe, he personally compiled and revised the fist manuals and spiritual books. A high sect had to look like a high sect, and it had to have a few legacies that could be passed down. The breathing and mountaineering technique taught by Old Man Yang in the medicine shop, Guyu's mountain-quaking fist, and Zheng Dafeng's deleted sword technique. Chun Pingan pulled his disciple Pei Qian over and compiled Cui Cheng's fist moves. At the same time, he sorted out the fist techniques of Nanny Bai of the Ning Mansion. The martial arts hidden in the white-haired boy's arsenal could be said to be the trump card of the martial artists. Chapter 1107. Chun Pingan got Xiaomi to knock on the door. The person who quickly opened the door was a young woman in a purple Taoist robe. She seemed to be the disciple of one of Heavenly Lord Xue's disciples. In that case, she was the Taoist priest of the 5 sects that had visited Luopa Mountain. She was the one with the lowest seniority. It seemed that the rules of the Flying Fairy Palace were not light. Zhu Zisho was stunned when she saw the adult and the child outside the door. Firstly, she finally saw the famous Mountain Lord Chun. Secondly, she was shocked to see the little girl in black riding on Mountain Lord Chen's neck. Chapter 1108. As they walked in the mountains, the wind blew the pines and the sound of swords and halberds could be heard. Birds flew to the top of the cliff and clouds rose from the clouds. The little girl in black patrolled the mountain all the way to the edge of the cliff. She was followed by Chief Zhou and Great Sword Fairy Mi. After sitting down, Xiaomi began to distribute the melon seeds. Even without speaking, the atmosphere was awkward. Chun Pingan munched on the melon seeds and suddenly asked a strange question. Does the former Jiang Shangzhen have any regrets after becoming the current Chief Zhou? The peak master of Yugui Sect's Jiui Peak, the North Continent's thief Jiang, the Lotus Flower Blessed Lands Chunqiao Palace's Zhou Fei, the Jiang family's master, who went on a killing spree in the Cloud Cave Blessed Land, and the Book Lake's True Realm Sect's Jiang Sect, that even the rogue cultivator Lu Laocheng did not dare to have any disloyalty. The main one was Jiang Shangzhen, who was thrown to the chair in the Divine Seal Peak's Ancestral Hall. If Jiang Shangzhen wanted to adapt and integrate into Luopa Mountain, it would be equivalent to accommodating Luopa Mountain. It would mean that Jiang Shangzhen was no longer the Jiang Shangzhen of the past. The most troublesome thing was that there were many smart people on Luopa Mountain. Chapter 1109. If there was more than one cross-continent ferry, then wouldn't there be some clues about the dragon slaying stone? Mountain Lord Qin accidentally spotted the dragon spine mountain as he ascended the ship and gazed into the distance. Shouldn't Sword Immortal Mi's suggestion be made when there were more people? How could he feel wrong to be the chief disciple of a small sect? Li Muzhou, the current head of the Observatory of Longitude. When the Taoist came, he was in the nascent soul realm and had yet to reach the bottleneck. Previously, in the study room of the gatekeeper of Luopa Mountain, Li Muzhou seemed to have been exposed. His state of mind was opened, and it was as if a heavy rain had washed away the dust. It was as if the clouds had been dispelled and the sun had been seen. He was like a hot knife through butter. Chapter 11:10. It was very strange that Qin Pingan, who had boasted shamelessly, just asked Taoist Ding some basic common sense. When did you abstain from eating? Before that, your 3 meals a day were irregular. On the path of cultivation. When did you enter a certain realm? Do you still remember the specific date? Do you still remember the details of your breathing and circulatory cycle in different realms? Even Xiego was too lazy to pretend to know, let alone Taoisting. She really did not know what the mountain master was thinking. If he really wanted to teach people and teach them the so-called ascension method, no matter how different Qin Pingan was, there was no need for him to be so uncouth, right? The music editor recorded everything down one by one. No matter how much the white-haired boy admired the hidden official ancestor, he could not help but curse in his heart. She had obtained a good title for this chapter, but as for the content, wasn't it a little too tasteless? Chapter 11:11. After entering the hall, Chen Pingan, who was temporarily pulled over by Ning Yao, approached a chair. He did not sit down, and gently pressed down on the armrest of the chair. Just as Chao Gun was about to speak, Xian Can took the lead and roughly explained the reason to the hidden official. Song Gaoyuan couldn't help but laugh. He suddenly felt like he had returned to the summer palace. However, he had to admit that they were relaxed when the young hidden official arrived. Chen Pingan heard the gist of it and smiled. This matter is a mess. It can be said that I have wronged you, but it can also be said that I have not wronged you. Because the person who attacked Wang Jia was a consecrator of my Luopa Mountain. She heard Wang Jia and the emperor of the Golden Pu dynasty drinking a little wine and talking about something unpleasant. Her temper is not particularly good, and now on Luopa Mountain, she is the one who values the identity of a consecrator the most, so she couldn't help it. Thus, I couldn't help but sneak a stab, which led to today's misunderstanding. Chapter 11:12. The brook river meandered into the sea, flowing endlessly. Thousands of spring mountains spread out like a painting, and it was easy for strange peaks to rise by the water. Chen Pingan informed Chao Gun and the others that they could return to the Feng Shui cave residence. The outside world was still happily speculating about which 2 ascended cultivators were fighting. Since they were expelled from the country by the domineering old sword immortal, they were destined to not get a share of the pie. They had to find some fun to relieve their boredom. They guessed that the one who fought with this ascendant realm sword cultivator was most likely Qinggong Taibao Jing of the Liuxia continent. Old immortal Jing. When they were waiting, Ning Yao asked, did the Lu clan of the Middle Earth's Yin Yang sect help to divine the fortune of the mine? Chapter 11:13. Treasure Vase Continent's Luopa Mountain Sword Reverence Platform, Tongye Continent's Green Duckweed Sword Sect, and He Xiangding and Yu Qingzong, who had become Yu Yu's disciples. In addition, Xie Songhua's group of sword immortals had taken away from the Great Wall of Sword Qi earlier. Life was not up to one's control. East, west, north, and south were like duckweed. The 9 embryonic sword cultivators who had left the Great Wall of Sword Qi with Qin Pingan were brought out by Master Chao, who had changed his name to Chao Imo from the Broken Grotto Heaven in the Jade Hairpin, and met them on a boat. Only Bai Xian and Nalin Yuji were in the Cave Abode realm. Now Bai Xian was already in the Dragon Gate realm. Sun Chunwang, who was the most hardworking and composed, was also in the Sea Viewing realm. After all, they had only been in Howren for a short period of time. Nearly half of the children had yet to enter the middle 5 realms. Among them, there was Yao Xiaoyan, who had the most natal flying swords. There was also Yu Qingzhong, whose flying sword was called the Great Duanyang and was rated as a B-high grade in the Summer Palace. On the other hand, He Xiangting, who loved to read books, had spent the whole night reading under the light during the heavy rain, repeatedly flipping through the Sword Art Sutra and several local chronicles. Inexplicably, he broke through a level without any bottleneck or obstruction, smoothly ascending to the Immortal Cave level. Master Yu was shocked. You're tuning into the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.